Okay, 1258, 1259, yeah. Right. So we had just started chapter 8. Let's look again at the depiction of Esther, starting on 1258 at the bottom of the page, verse 3. And as I said, I think verses 1 and 2 of the chapter are really a foreshadow of what happens after this dramatic interplay. So where we're really standing is that Haman has been exposed, and the king says, off with his head, hang him up on the gallows. And the king's anger abated. What triggered his anger? Well, basically, that Haman was attacking the queen. And you can imagine that he didn't like that. Did Haman know what he was doing? Didn't he? Was it premeditated? Off with his head. Okay, so the guy who was attacking the queen is now eliminated. Now, she really said more. He asked her specifically what is her she'ela and what is her bakasha. She'ela is something personal, and bakasha is something social, political, and so forth and so on. And she said, I have both, a she'ela and a bakasha. She'ela is, I don't want to die, and the bakasha is that my people shouldn't die. So he's left one behind. Now, did he forget? Is he so simple-minded that, golly, or did he not hear it because he was worried about his queen and somebody would attack the queen? Or was he reluctant? Not clear from the text, clearly, but up until now, I wouldn't have expected that he'd forget. And she has to now bring it back up. So, she spoke, back down at verse 3, yet again she spoke to the king. How did she do it? She collapsed at his feet, cried, and begged him to avert the evil intention of Haman Agagite and his scheme which he plotted against the Jews. Here you have to picture her on the floor, crying, sobbing and blurting out the words, oh, help my people, and so on and so on. Okay, king extended the golden scepter. There it is again. The Midas Adin, the attribute of strictest justice, accepts her. Oh, she arose and she spoke before the king the following well thought out, well planned, well phrased speech. She said, if it pleases the king, and if I have won his favor, and the proposal seems proper in the king's opinion, and I be pleasing to him, 4 times, it's only up to you. That's all. I'll tell you what you should do, and why you should do it, and so forth and so on. I'm giving you any reasons. I hope this pleases you. She knows exactly what her place is. Her place is to please him. And she puts herself in twice. If it pleases the king, and I have won his favor, and the proposal is proper to the king's opinion, and I be pleasing to him, meaning that she's going to appeal to the king for her people. So it's not just there is a people in danger, and that people needs to be saved. No, you are motivated by doing for me, so I'm on the line here with respect to my people. It's a political request, but it's a political request with me in mind also. Let a decree be written to countermand those dispatches devised by Haman. And this, I told you yesterday, what she's saying now can't be. This is just a mistake. Or, in other words, in his eyes, that's a woman. What does she know about politics? What does she know about how to run an empire? Countermand, contradict, that can't be done. Okay, she's just talking. Again, she presents herself as weak, as no competition. He can disregard her as a person. Devised by Haman, which he wrote ordering the destruction of the Jews and all the king's provinces. Why? Why am I asking this? I'll tell you why I'm asking this. For how can I bear witness to the disaster which befall my people? How can I bear witness to the destruction of my relatives? It's all for me. I'm not telling you it's good for economy, or it's good politics, or good for defense, or good for your reputation. All I can tell you is I'm going to be I'm going to be destroyed by it. So she knows exactly where to come from. This is a very well-prepared, well-thought-out, well-expressed speech. So, King Achashverosh said to Queen Esther and Mordechai the Jew, "Behold, I've given Haman's estate to Esther, and he has been hanged on the gallows because he plotted against the Jews." I also made a mistake. The previous books are in order. Now, listen to what the king says. "You may write concerning the Jews whatever you devise in the king's name. You can write whatever you want, whatever you devise, as long as you follow the law. And seal the royal signet. For an edict which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's royal signet may not be revoked." So you can write whatever you figure out, but the way Esther put it can't be done. It can't be revoked. So now you have a little bit of a logical problem. The decrees went out; those decrees are binding, and now they're going to write something else and somehow solve the problem. But they do solve it. What was the original decree? The original decree was that on the 13th of Adar, all the peoples of the can exterminate the Jews. All the peoples are free to and can exterminate Jews. Okay. King's secretaries were summoned at that time, 23rd day of the third month. This is now Sivan, the month of Sivan. And it was written exactly as Mordechai had dictated to the Jews and satraps. Now, let's see. This confrontation is happening in Nisan. As we said yesterday, it's either the 15th of Nisan or the 16th of Nisan. And they're sending out the countermand, the new orders in Sivan? That's more than 2 months later. Why did they wait so long? And the answer is given by the commentators is a political answer. Who are they going to send these new orders with? If they send the new orders with different messengers, some in the distant provinces will say, "Aha, we got a message from the king from these messengers, and then we got another message from the king from these messengers. What's going on in the capital? Is there a battle in the capital? Are there two competing, and they one stole the ring from the other, and so on and so on? What exactly is going on in the capital?" It arouses suspicions. They can't communicate by SMS. So they're waiting for the original messengers to come back, and then sending out the same messengers. Now, if it took the messengers roughly, we're talking about 9 weeks to make the round trip, then that means it takes 4.5 weeks to get to the end of the empire, and 4.5 weeks to come back. Okay, maybe they went out quickly, they came back more leisurely because they're just coming back, right? But something like that. It's a big kingdom. They went on fast animals, so they're waiting for them to come back. That's why they waited. That's why the commentators say they waited till Sivan, so there'll be no doubt about the legitimacy of what they're doing. Okay, so now, this is what they write. 11. They wrote, to the effect that the king had permitted the Jews of every single city to organize and defend themselves, to destroy, slay, and exterminate, same words used in the original decree to kill them, exterminate every armed force or any people or province that threatened them, along with their children and women, and to plunder their possessions on a single day in all the provinces of the king of Ahasuerus, namely, on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. So, if you compare that with the original decree, which is on page 1255, verse 13, letters were sent by courier to all the king's provinces to destroy, slay, and exterminate the Jews, young and old, etc., etc. The first messages were to the non-Jewish population: kill and destroy all the Jews and take their possessions. The second decree doesn't say they can't do that. It doesn't say they can't do it. It just says the Jews don't have to roll over and play dead. The Jews can defend themselves. So it's not really contradicting the previous one. So now, if you're sitting out there in the provinces and you get these two things, it sounds like the king is prepared for, encouraging commanding civil war. You guys do this, you guys do that. Okay, now what can the average citizen on the street in the provinces predict as to the outcome of this conflict? Well, let's see. Didn't the king hang Haman because he was trying to destroy the Jews? As the king will say shortly. And isn't the prime minister Jewish? And isn't the queen Jewish? How's it going to look if we really fight the Jews? And what about the local army garrisons? They knowing that the prime minister is Jewish and the queen is Jewish. Whose side are they going to be on? I think that the non-Jewish population, even with the first decree in hand, is going to be very reluctant to take up arms against the Jews. It looks like the Jews are riding on top now. So that's what they devised, and of course it worked to success. Um, 13, the contents of the document was promulgated to every province, published to all peoples, so that the Jews should be ready on that day to avenge themselves of their enemies. And in these descriptions, that the ones are coming up, there's a difference between enemies and those that hate them. And as you'll see, they get different treatment. An enemy is someone who acts against you. Someone who hates you may hate you in his heart, but maybe he's afraid to act against you. Maybe he needs you for something, and he doesn't act overtly against you. And they get different treatment, as you will see. But it means even those who hate you in their hearts and don't act against you, the revenge is to be there. The couriers, riders of swift mules, went forth in urgent haste by order of the king. The edict was distributed in Shushan, the capital. So, until now, the Jews saw that Haman was hung, and Mordechai is prime minister, and Queen Esther happens to be Jewish. I suppose they felt relief. They didn't feel anymore that they were in mortal danger. But the decree was standing. Something has to be done about that, and it can't be revoked. When they saw this, they saw the plan for the way of avoiding the consequences of the first decree, and then they had joy. Mordechai left the king's presence clad in royal apparel of turquoise and white, a large crown, a robe of fine linen, and purple. The city of Shushan was cheerful and glad. The city of Shushan. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. If it were a famous word, we say them every day, every Saturday night at Havdalah. Right? Now they were in joy. Likewise, in every province, in every city, wherever the king's command decree reached, Jews had same thing. Gladness and joy. A feast and a holiday. Maybe if we have time, we'll talk about that. Moreover, many among... Oh, now here, this is a very interesting verse. Moreover, many from among the people of the land... Now, the word in Hebrew is misyahadim. Well, that's not a common word. I'm sure there's only once in the entire 1,000 pages of Tanakh. Yahad, that's Yehudi, Jew. Lihis Yahed in Hebrew would mean to make yourself Jewish. Some try to translate it as they were converting to Judaism. Well, they were scared out of their boots, what's going to happen? But it's a little difficult because we have a general rule that when the Jews are ascendant politically, militarily, and economically, we don't accept converts because it's very difficult to ascertain that their motivation is sincere to become Jews and to worship the creator of the universe. Very difficult to ascertain that. During the times of David and Solomon, the Sanhedrin made a rule not to accept converts. What's interesting is some courts did against the rule. They did accept converts. And the ruling for them was if they live out the whole of their lives until they die as faithfully practicing Jews, then retroactively the conversion was valid and their lives were actually Jewish lives. But if later on they go back to their non-Jewish practices, then retroactively that means the conversion was never a conversion. The later change shows that the original one wasn't really sincere. And it makes a big difference, because if you really convert and then you become Jewish, there's no way out. Just like a born Jew can't stop being a Jew, so a correctly converted Jew can't stop being a Jew. And then what he does later, when he abandons Jewish practice, counts against him as a renegade Jew. Whereas if the conversion is conditional the way it was at that time, so then it only means that he goes back to his non-Jewish standing, which would be much better for him. At any rate, the other way the commentators take it is the way it's translated here. They professed themselves Jews. Richard McClintock. Hello, Richard. What's new? I have a Jewish uncle. A great uncle. We did some research, and I have Jewish roots. I have Jewish connections. Right, Richard McClintock. Okay, I hear you. They were frightened, and this was a way of sort of protecting themselves, having some kind of Jewish connections. Trump has Jewish grandchildren, so it's not the only thing that counts good for him, but that's all we could get. Okay, now, what happens? So, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, when the king's command and edict were about to be enforced, on the very day the enemies of the Jews expected to gain the upper hand over them, and it was turned about, upside down, the Jews gained the upper hand over their adversaries. So this is a reference to the same theme that you had with the gallows. Haman made the gallows in order to hang Mordechai, and he ended up on his own gallows. Here, the plan was to wipe out the Jews on that day, and on that very same day, on the contrary, the Jews are going to wipe out their enemies. Now here, they translate the adversaries, that's in the Hebrew sonehem, those who hate them. So we have the two terms in English, enemies and adversaries. Enemies is stronger, they're the people who act against, and adversaries are those who hate. Now, it's a verb here, which I didn't stress before, but it was also higher on the page. The Jews organized themselves in their cities. Above, it says, in verse 11, right in the middle of the page, to the effect that the king permitted the Jews of every city to organize and defend themselves. Here's another thread in the story. What did Haman say to the king to convince him that eliminating the Jews was a free deal, a deal with no strings attached, nothing that he had to worry about? One of the things he said was, "Yeshno am echad mifuzar u'mfarad," meaning call umos. They are mifuzar, which means scattered, and farad means divided. So they are geographically dispersed, and they are divided among themselves, so that you don't worry about organized defense of the Jewish people coming from themselves. Then he also said they don't keep the laws of other peoples, so they're not going to have any allies from the other people. So you're going to do this without any opposition. The first move here is to become a kahal. Nikalu means to become a kahal, which means to become a congregation, to become a single unit of people. And that didn't mean that they all have to give up their homes in 127 provinces and all move to Shushan, but it meant to unify in each of the cities to become, instead of 16 competing parties, it's 16 competing parties with mutual respect and mutual identification. What people have been talking about here since October 7th, and since before October 7th, that it's the breakdown of the sense of mutuality and the sense of commonality, comradeship with people with whom you disagree. Right. What's also broken down in the United States altogether, although there have been earlier periods in United States history where it broke down as well. It isn't as if this is the only time when there's going to break down. It's more severe in this certain respects. Here, and it says this over and over again, they organized themselves. This was the spiritual antidote to the condition which made them vulnerable at the first part to the attack of Haman. So, verse 2 at the very bottom of 1259, the Jews organized themselves in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to attack those who sought their hurt. Now here this is a phrase, a descriptive phrase in the Hebrew, Mevakshei Rasam. So we really have now three terms. I think this would be consistent with Oivehem, which are their adversaries. I'm not sure that this is a third group. We have those who hate in the heart and those ones who actively try to hurt. No one stood in their way, for fear of them have fallen upon all the peoples. So, number one, no one stood in their way. Moreover, all the provincial officials, what about the local mayors and the local governors and people who check the weights and measures in the market and the local groups of soldiers and so forth, satraps, governors, all that conduct the king's affairs, deferred to the Jews because the fear of Mordechai had fallen upon them. You know, the prime minister, like Elon Musk, he can fire you, right? And he can do other things to you that you might not like. Right? So there are people are afraid of him. For Mordechai was now preeminent in the royal palace, and his fame was spreading throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordechai grew increasingly greater. And of course that means he's organizing the kingdom. He's now the prime minister. He's doing now what Haman used to do, which would be not just protecting Jews. He would be taking care of organizing the empire. And the Jews struck at their here it's oivehem. This is the strong term, adversaries, with a sword, slaughtering and annihilating. And they treated sonehem, those who hate them, as they pleased. So you have two different descriptions here. One is a detailed description. It means actually slaughtering them, murdering them. That's for those who were actively seeking to injure them. Sonehem are the ones who hate them in their hearts. And there it says they did as they pleased. It doesn't tell you what they did. It probably varied from case to case. And it's much less than just annihilating them. In Shushan, the capital, the Jews slew and annihilated 500 men and 10 sons of Haman. The long list, which I'm not going to read. Sons of Haman, of Dasa, the Jews' enemy. But they did not lay their hand on the spoils. The decree gave them the right to plunder the property of their enemies. They didn't touch it. It was a point of saying, what are we doing? What are we doing? We are relieving ourselves from danger. That's what we are accomplishing. Nothing else. So that if anybody's thinking about it with a morally straight mind, of course you protect yourself against those who are trying to hurt you. Anybody has the right to do that. If they take the money, then they appear to have a double motivation. Yeah, of course you're protecting yourself against people who want to hurt you. That's perfectly right. And it's no problem with putting some money in the bank, taking over some houses and so on and so on. That means that there's also a morally questionable motivation for doing what they're doing. And they didn't do that. They had the right to do it. And any honest non-Jew at the time could say, if I were in their shoes, what would I have done? I'd have really, Even when we left Egypt, they went to the Egyptians and said, we're asking you to give us your stuff. And they had to agree. because Baruch Hu gave the charm of the Jewish people in the eyes of the Egyptians, and they volunteered to give. They didn't come in with a sword and say, "Give it or death." They didn't do that. So there's a caring here that the purity of motivation should be preserved. So 500 people were killed in Shushan, and these 10 sons. Verse 11 on 1260. The same day, the number of those killed in Shushan, the capital, reported to the king. King said to Queen Esther, in Shushan, the capital, the Jews have slain and annihilated 500 men, as well as the 10 sons of Haman. What must they have done in the rest of the king's provinces? What is your request now? It shall be granted you. Same thing. Sheila, what do you want for yourself? What is your petition further, without the qualification of not being only up to half the kingdom? Because he already sees what she wants. What she'll want now is just some extension of this, or some application of this. He knows it's not going to destabilize his empire, and therefore he doesn't have to put in the qualification anymore. She said, if it pleases His Majesty, allow the Jews who are in Shushan act tomorrow as they did today, let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. In all of the provinces, it was a one-day affair. In Shushan, they had 2 days to kill their enemies and punish those who hate them, and the 10 should be publicized as to what they are doing. Now, let's see, I once tried to figure this out. You have 127 provinces. How many people are living in the capital of Shushan? Hard to know, but 127 provinces need a lot of attention. As we saw, there's a literary class of people who can write in the script of the 127 provinces and write in the language of the 127 provinces. There's a bureaucratic class here. And capital is a place where the palace is. There's a lot to be done. And there were big cities in those days. Cities with hundreds of thousands of people. So let's say Shushan had 100,000 people. The Jews killed 500. What ratio is that? 500 to 100,000. So 1 in 200, maybe? Very small. 1 in 200. So in the rest of the provinces, what must they have done? 1 in 200. Probably. Something like that. You're not talking about, this was what worried what worried the king. Right? You're not talking about destabilizing the whole empire because 1 in 200 get killed. It's a very, very small percentage. So he sees this is not going to destabilize. Also, I'm just speaking now in terms of practical politics, to have a nation which is scattered and which is intelligent and industrious and which is very faithful to you because one of theirs is your prime minister and one of theirs is your queen, could be an advantage. They are ears. They know what's happening. They can keep track of what's going on in the whole empire. Who else is like that? So it could be an advantage to him in this respect. And politically savvy people among the rest of the population could figure out that it was an advantage also. So I think that's part of the way he's calculating it. And he says to her, okay, 1 to 200, that's what they did here, that's what they did there, whatever you want. If that's the kind of request you're making, that's the scope of the request you're making, so then I'm happy to do it. Now, what does this say about the general population? If they killed all those who were seeking their hurt, plus, they maybe not have killed them, but let's take that. So 1 in 200, it means the general population was fairly comfortable for the Jewish people. They're victims. They're scattered. They have no local representation. They don't have geographical continuity. They're open to be victimized. Apparently, there wasn't a sizable proportion of the population that really wanted to hurt them. So that's also remarkable. I think. And it must mean that wherever they were, when they killed the ones whom they killed, the neighbors could nod their heads and say, yep, he definitely was bad for the Jews. No question about it. Kenya West would go right away. He was bad for the Jews. So if that's the case, again, an honest non-Jew could look at it and say, boy, if I had that opportunity, I knew somebody was trying to drag me down, burn down my house or whatever, I definitely would protect myself. And they only did that. They didn't go after anybody else. So it's something which can be respected. So now apparently there was unfinished business in Shushan. So she wanted another day. And everywhere else, the king ordered this be done. A decree was distributed in Shushan. They hanged Haman's son, and the Jews of Shushan assembled again, 14th day of the month of Adar, and slew 300 men. So it's 800 now. But they did not lay a hand on the spoils. They didn't touch anything. The rest of the Jews throughout the king's provinces organized, every time it says organized, and defended themselves, and gained relief from their foes, slaying 75,000. But they did not lay their hand on the spoils, not a single one. That was the 13th. And they gained relief on the 14th, making it a day of feasting and gladness. Jews were in Shushan, assembled on both the 13th and 14th. They gained relief on the 15th, making it a day of feasting and gladness. That is why the Jews who live. That's where Purim came from. Now the Meshech Chochmah here makes a calculation. You have a big war, and you win the war. What do you celebrate? Do you celebrate destroying your enemies? Or do you celebrate the relief that you have because you have destroyed your enemies? The day on which the great battle took place was the 13th, everywhere. So, if you're going to celebrate the downfall of your enemies, you should celebrate the 13th of Adar. That's when the great battle took place, and that's when the enemies were destroyed. If you're going to celebrate the relief that you got from the destruction of your enemies, then you celebrate it on the 14th. And of course, it's celebrated on the 14th. So the Meshech Chochmah says, you see from here, we don't celebrate destroying our enemies. We don't celebrate destroying our enemies. What we celebrate is the fact that our enemies no longer are causing us danger. We're safe. And he brought a very interesting raya to this, analogy to this. The holiday of Pesach is 7 days long. And it's an official holiday, the first day and the seventh day. And the in-between days are what do we call? Chol Hamoed, where it's part of the 7 day celebration, but the intermediary days where the restrictions on work are very minimal. But the other days are full-fledged holidays. What happened on the 7th of Pesach in the original Exodus history? What happened the seventh day was the crossing of the sea, where the Egyptians were drowned, and the Jews were saved. And the Meshech Chochmah points out the command to have a 7-day holiday, and that the first day and the seventh day be designated holidays, was given to them in Egypt before they left, before the crossing of the sea took place. So you shouldn't say that we are celebrating the event at the sea. That's not what it's for. It was in place before that event took place. And then he brings Purim as another example of the same thing. That the day that they celebrate was the day after the battle, not the day of the battle. She'll ask, what is the seventh day of Pesach? Okay, that's a separate issue, that's a separate discussion what it is. But it isn't celebrating the anniversary of the destruction of the Egyptians at the Red Sea. It's a very interesting remark of the Meshech Chochmah. Now it's at the very end here. Let's back to 16. The rest of the Jews throughout the king's provinces organized, defended themselves, gaining relief for their foes, dwelling 75,000. Did not lay their hand on the spoils. That was the 13th day of the month of Adar. They gained relief on the 14th day, making it a day of feasting and gladness. And as I told you a few days ago, the word that's translated feasting here in Hebrew is mishteh, which means a drinking party. The shtot in Hebrew means to drink. Yeah, there are pretzels in between the drinks, so not to get it up to the stomach, but it's not as if you're having filet mignon and other delicacies and you have a cup of wine to accompany it. No, it's a drinking party. And gladness is simcha. Jews in Shushan were selling on the 13th and 14th, getting rid of the 15th, making the 15th day a day of feasting and gladness. Now it says, that is why Jewish villagers who lived in unwalled towns celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar as an occasion of gladness and feasting. Reversing it, simcha b'mishteh, for holiday making and for sending delicacies to one another. And the ones in Shushan do it on the 15th. So here you have both Shushan and the provinces. Now, on the previous page, you have 1259, you have at the bottom of the page, verse 17. Likewise, in every province and every city, the king's command is decree reached. The Jews had gladness and joy, a feast and a holiday. 9 at the bottom. 13th day, that's when they had the war. Jews gained the upper hand. Jews organized themselves. No one stood in their way. So, right, I'm sorry. So they ask, so in other words, I'm sorry, let's try this again. At the bottom of 1260, it says, everywhere, 13th they fought, and the 14th they had relief. In Shushan, the 13th and 14th they fought, the 15th they had release. And then it says, that is why Jewish villagers live in unwalled cities make the 14th day. Why is it this that is why only applied to the villagers? And one of the commentators wants to say, if you look at it politically, we said there were two decrees. The first decree was kill Jews. The second decree was Jews can defend themselves and kill those who wish to harm them. And we indicated the motivation of the average non-Jew and average anti-Semite is, since the prime minister is Jewish and the queen is Jewish, things can get out of hand. Better lay low. But that motivation wasn't as strong in the scattered villages as it was in big cities. Because big cities, you have a bureaucracy belonging to the king, and you have officials belonging to the king, and things will get back to the king. And in small villages, that wasn't so. So the Jews in small villages felt more in danger at the end of this procedure, and therefore they were more in relief, and therefore their spontaneous celebration was more. That's the idea here. And now, some of you may be aware, this is a tricky idea, and there's certain subtleties to it. Some of you may be aware that we today have cities in which we celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar. Like, for example, the one you're sitting in, right? Yerushalayim. How does that happen? In terms of the actual events, the only place that fought for 2 days and had relief on the third day was Shushan, the capital, somewhere in Iraq. How did it get to be that Yerushalayim and certain other cities also celebrate Purim on the 15th? And the way it got to be that was this, that the rabbis, when they were making the rules for Purim, and they had to take into account the difference between Shushan and other places, decided that they were going to use Shushan as an emblem. They're not just going to record the actual historical events, they're going to use Shushan as an emblem, and they associated with Shushan every city that was walled in the times of Yoshua. Which means that, and why? Because those cities were the ones that were conquered by Yoshua when he came to the land of Israel. And at this moment, when the Jews were in Babylon and in Persia, those cities were in ruin. They had been conquered by the Babylonians. So as to give honor to the ancient cities of the Jewish people in Israel, the law was made in such a way as to include all those cities in the celebration on the 15th. Not just the Shushan. Now here you see a kind of interesting feature. This is a rabbinic institution. The whole of Purim is a rabbinic institution. It was made by the rabbis in order to commemorate this great miracle. Commemorating miracles is a biblical theme, but applying it to a new event and creating new rules is something which is rabbinic. When you are dealing with commemorating a certain particular historical event, you can combine in that commemoration also other features which are relevant. After all, this is a miracle that took place in exile. That's something which is very notable. Typically, God's providence is much more manifest in the land of Israel than it is outside the land of Israel. So, to build into the laws a feature that's connected to the land of Israel when they aren't in the land of Israel emphasizes the fact that this is a kind of external miracle. So a miracle takes place externally. And in that respect, you're supposed to then conceive of the Jews as out of place because they really belong over there in the land of Israel. And not only do they really belong over there, but their connection to the land of Israel also has an influence on what they are outside the land of Israel. So, for example, we have a general rule that prophecy only takes place in the land of Israel. They all had prophecy at Sinai and so on and so on. That was all part of the process of getting to the land of Israel. They had prophecy in Babylon. Ezekiel, prophet, was a prophet in Babylon. Yes, because being in Babylon was only temporary. After 70 years, they're going back and they're going to rebuild the temple. So all of it is a continuation of getting back to the temple. And that means that Yechezkel had prophecy in Babylon against the general rule because they're only in an interim and they're on the way back. So it means that they're being connected to the land of Israel justifies them having prophecy outside the land of Israel. By the way, Jonah, the book of Jonah, the reason he runs away is because when he leaves Israel, God's not going to appear to him anymore as a prophet. So God says, go to Nineveh, and he says, I'm going to Tarshish. Sorry, I have a ticket to the other side of the Mediterranean. All right? So what does God do? He causes a storm, and then he is spit out. By the way, you read about this guy who was swallowed by a whale? There's an actual guy in I forget where he was, off South America, I think. He was swallowed by a whale briefly. Spit it back out. And spit it back out, right? I mean, there's a video that sort of shows it. What happened to him was that whatever fish it was spit him out on the shore of Israel, and he went back into the land of Israel. So God said, don't try to fight with me. You're trying to escape Israel in order to escape prophecy? Too bad. I'll deliver you back to the land of Israel. And then he tells him again, go to Nineveh. This time he goes to Nineveh. So you see that being, as we would say in colloquial, Eretz Israel Dikka, you're an Eretz Israel Jew. Even if you happen to be living in Chicago, you're an Eretz Israel Jew, has an effect on who you are, has an effect on your conditions. This is one of the things that this way of formulating the law of the 15th said to the Jews who were at that time in the provinces of Achashverosh and not in the land of Israel. Okay, we still have more work to do on the book next week in Mitzvah Hashem. 2 days of Q&A as usual, and then starting on Tuesday we'll go back to Megillas Esther.